So those results revealed that I have 92% sub-Saharan. Quote, I really don't like that term, but I just use it because that's the phrase that they use. 92% sub-Saharan African ancestry, 7% mixed European DNA, European ancestry from places like Wales, France, Italy, I want to say Denmark, Britain, or England, one of those two. And then I have 1%, was it North or Central Filipino ancestry? And so now throughout the updates, throughout the years, different percentages have fluctuated and changed. Some disappear, and I believe those are oftentimes called echoes or autosomal echoes. It's like it's so distant that just like it's reflecting in your DNA, but it's not in a substantial amount to say that this is something that's current. Currently, my highest African percentage is Nigeria at 21%, and my Ivory Coast and Ghana is at 19 or 20%, and my Cameroonian lineage has roughly remained within the same range, which is 9%. And I have genetic ties to ethnic groups like the Igbo, Ibibio, Mamuye, Yoruba, the Isan. I have Mali ancestry that ties back to the Dogon, and I want to say, I believe it was the Bambara, the Tiv of that central Nigeria, central Nigerian woodlands. And what I did was, once taking my ancestry test, because when I initially took it, it only gave regions. It didn't give ethnic groups along with those regions. So there are two other services that I utilize, one being Living DNA and the other being GEDmatch. GEDmatch was the one that gave me the ethnic groups in detail because I have strong Bantu genetic ties. It showed the migration of people going from the Cameroonian region and into South Africa. So that is where it highlighted that I had Pedi and Soto and Thwana and Zulu ancestry, along with the Fang, the Ga. Like it was interesting to see when we hear these things, the average African ancestry of a Black American is 75%. They exclude the fact that when you deal with groups of people who have Gullah Geechee ancestry, those percentages are usually way higher.
Hmm.
And because my lineage primarily migrated throughout the South, and by me still remaining in the South, a lot of the other admixtures that would come along in the process, those don't appear in my ancestry because like, it didn't move into up north where you had a lot of people from Poland and Hungary and Germany coming
Hmm.
into the mix. And the 7% European ancestry that I do have, I'm honestly, my hypothesis on that may have come from one person because of the small amounts of it and the distance it is. We know that the higher the percentage, the closer. The lower the percentage, the more distant it is. So seeing as though it took 7% of my DNA, but that's not just a flat seven, that's 1%
Yeah.
here. This is more than likely somebody who could be from the late 1600s, could be
Hmm.
from the mid 1700s. And the Filipino ancestry, what I've discovered is that a lot of times that Filipino ancestry is tied to people who may have Malagasy ancestry, and there were a lot of Filipino people brought into Louisiana. There were also a lot of people of Malagasy descent brought into Louisiana. This is where we see another admixture into the Creole identity that often gets left out. The Malagasy people are people that primarily are in Madagascar, and they had an ancient interaction, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on my studies, it said 1,000 to 2,000 years ago, there was an Austronesian connection there was a migration of people from these islands coming into Madagascar. And when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, we typically focus on West and Central Africa. We usually don't talk about East Africa, South Africa, and the slave trade that they endured. So we're also looking at people who, by happens chance, may have been sold later down the line. These people may have been taken to places like the Bahamas or Barbados, or
Mm-hmm.
they may have been taken into the Caribbean, or even taken into places like Haiti. And then when you look at the history of Haiti, and then you see these Haitians being brought into Louisiana during a certain time frame, I feel like this is where we start to see the influx of certain Benin and Togo related ethnic groups being found in Southern African Americans if you're not of Caribbean descent. And because some of the main groups that were taken to Haiti were the Ajan, the Ewe, and the Fan. And it's evident that these groups were taken because you have voodoo in Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
Benin is the birthplace of Vodun. Voodoo is an extension of Vodun.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get into Louisiana and you have places that practice voodoo, but they also have places like Congo Square, we know that you have the Bukongo and the Mbundu people and probably the Ndongo being brought into these regions. So there is no one ethnic group that Black or African Americans stem from. And I
Right.
think that that's what causes a lot of confusion in theory because a lot of people are not aware of how diverse these groups are. It's just like when even in the US we have these different ethnic identities. I identify as African American based on American nationality and the conversation that we're having. In
Mm-hmm.
my eyes, I'm African, period. I don't need to add anything additional to it. But knowing that that's confusing for some people who may not understand these types of the objective of self-identifying. So when someone says I'm Black American, and then this person says I'm African American, then this person says, well, I'm just Black. This is all the
Same group
these
of
aren't
people.
these are the same groups of people. These people aren't different because they choose to self-identify differently. Now, in some instances, there are exclusions. So when you look at people who may come from the Appalachians, or you're looking at people who have these different groups of people who are being sent to different places. And I think that when we dig deeper into the history of enslavement in this country, you'll see no, these people weren't just randomly grabbing groups of people and making them work. They were specifically requesting ethnic groups based on what name they knew them by. So you could look into a record and see IBO, and that's Igbo in how they pronounced it. But they might say, look, I don't send no more of them. Or if you do send some more, only send the women, don't send the men. I
Mm-hmm.
need some of the Mandinkas. Give me some of these groups. And it wasn't just no happens chance. All right, we got 100 something Africans off a boat. Now let's just put them to work. No, some of
Right.
these people were rebelling. A lot of them were doing things. This is where our maroons come from. These people who, soon as they got off the ship, they nope, no sir, not doing that to me.
Right.
I'll fight to the death, whatever it takes. I'm not going to allow that to happen. And I think that the process over time and the sensationalized aspects and the Hollywood projection of what slavery actually was has rocked our people to sleep a little bit. They oftentimes just look at it from a Hollywood perspective, and I call it the Ten Commandment effect. I'm not sure your age, but I know as a kid, the Ten Commandments movie had a strong impact on how people viewed the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the things that they draw from their perspective on things of a biblical nature or even with roots. A lot of people draw their perspectives on the enslavement of our people in this country based off of films and not by
Mm-hmm.
the documented literary work because films have a tendency to they
Romanticize,
utilize say it again.
romanticize and
Exactly. Exactly.
misinform.
Right. And it makes it palatable. It's discomfort We want to make sure you're not comfortable with this. So we're going to show certain aspects of it, but we're not going to really go into full detail. This is the things that you'll have to read on your own. And because of some of the controversy behind Roots and Alex Haley, I realized when having conversations with people about African history in this country, that is usually their frame of reference. And they're like, well, he took that book from some, like that part doesn't matter. You could literally go innumerable places and find information that speaks to exactly what was shown in this film. So by being able to utilize these different ancestry tools, ancestry DNA, if you use 23andMe, I allocated a certain amount of money to specific genetic testing. And I haven't reached that max. I haven't reached that point yet. And I've already done 3 tests. So my next steps will be African ancestry and 23andMe because I'm very interested in finding out what my haplogroup markers are. So I want to compile these things. That way, when future discussions, whether it's in my family or other families, because I want to create, I'm in the process of working on a book that kind of details and works through this process. It's kind of like a manual for people. I don't just want a book that says, hey, praise me for what I found. I want to create a tool that can be implemented by our people to say, oh, he did it, I can do it. And he's allowing me access to the tools to use.
Oh, that's wonderful. Definitely keep us in the loop for the book because that goes along with one of my initiatives. One of the parts of that we do is help people research. I know we've even sponsored tests. I've sponsored a few people getting tested with Ancestry when the opportunity arises, just because it is valuable information and it is other things you can do with it. I swear by GED I have the subscription. I'm on that doing all
that's a
types
great
of
tool.
stuff. It is amazing. That was one of the first things I did after I got my ancestry test. It was to take it and find out those different groups because I was just like you, so unsatisfied. I was like, what is this?
This tells me it only confirms an ideal I already
I
held
already
before
had.
taking the test. Yes.
And like you said, I'm Gullah Geechee, so it's kind of like we knew those regions. That wasn't a surprise to me. What I want to know is what groups. I want to know those links of those ethnic groups, those tribes. Show me the tribes so I can find out more because Nigeria is a big place. So show me who I come from exactly. So great insight there, especially now that Ancestry is doing it too. Because when Ancestry does it, since they started, they just give you, if you match with one person who has that DNA marker in that whole area, you now are that. And I don't necessarily agree. So I take what Ancestry has for that tribal information and I cross reference it with my GED match because I know not all those things apply to me, not all of them. And so that's a good tool to use. And like you said, we all one people. And I like how you mentioned the fact, and it's glossed over. A lot of times our ancestors were chosen because of where they were from and what they could do. That's why you see us with that Gullah Geechee ancestry, we can really look at another person's DNA test and pick them out of you can pick us out because our DNA markers are really similar. They chose the same groups of people to go to these places and do these things. And it is just fascinating that you can do that and you can use those groupings to find out where some of your ancestors came from. Just knowing, oh, I have a high concentration of this right here. Well, if I look at the slave manifest to see where they were sending these people, I can have a starting point to maybe trace somebody who came from there. So or where they went to, or it's a bridge that you can use. It's a tool that you can use to build a bridge is what I'm trying to say. Great insight there. Definitely look more into it because it's important when we're building our trees to see those different places and then find the records. It helps. And then we were talking about earlier, it helps to know the tribes and what this means for if you see a certain piece of information when you do find those slave manifests. What does that mean? Who does that link you to? What information can you do with that? I did have a question about the European ancestry that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Usually, those can sometimes be the easiest to trace back. I know I found two lines of European. I have 4% spread out against across Wales, France, and somewhere else. Like I said, we usually have the same thing. But when I started looking for these people, it was a lot easier to find. I traced some of my European ancestry back to the 1400s. Have you been able to also do that, or have you looked at them and sat them to the side because it's like, I'm not really checking for you right now?
So I actually did look into a few of those groups of people. And I think that one of the interesting things that I found was that I have not been able to find any European ancestry that I'm directly related to. What I did find was that because on platforms like Ancestry, you create your trees, right? So when you create your trees, anyone can put anyone they want to on these trees,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when I was doing the background research on Albert Perry, what I noticed was that they had enslavers listed as his parents. And since they had his enslavers listed as his parents, the people who I was able to trace back into the 1600s, these were all Europeans, but these Europeans were connected to the slave owners and weren't actually connected to anyone that I could find in my immediate genealogy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I believe that I want to say maybe my three-time great grandmother may have been mixed. So there are some names on hers that I need to go through because they tend to go into the 1700s as well. But it is much easier to trace Euro descended people than it is to trace those of African ancestry. And I want to say Ancestry did when they did the update, it's like check out your famous ancestor. And somebody came and it was Robert Frost. I was like, Robert Frost. I was like, that's interesting. Let me click and see where the connection is. But he was related to the Perrys that owned my ancestors. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, that's interesting. And it was another, it was like a Confederate general, Rufus Dawes or something like that. And I want to look some more into him because I'm like, is that where they got the Dawes Rolls names from? It's just a thought. That's not an actual, you know what I'm saying, a
Yeah.
find, but just less interesting and to see these different groups of people being attributed as family members or saying like this is your relative. They're this distance from you, but it's like me and these people aren't even related. So that's another thing too. You have those who prefer genealogy over DNA, right? Because they feel like genealogy tells more of the truth. But I believe it for some, it's more because I can put who I want there and I
Mm-hmm.
can make this look how I want it to look. So to prove whatever narrative it is that I may be selling or trying to convey to people, I can do that with genealogy. I can't necessarily do that with DNA because DNA is going to tell, look, this is not giving you people, this is giving you regions that you share genetics with.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in genealogy, you can be like, this is my grandmother, but I don't know that for sure. It breaks down to integrity and what the person is trying to do. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're really adamant about highlighting just your family in general, then whether good or bad, you're going to place them there. But I seen a guy who had Genghis Khan as one of his ancestors. But it's like you put that there, and you'll go and tell a Native American they Siberian, but you got Genghis Khan on your genealogy. So it's just sometimes I think that we lose sight sometimes because folks like to say, it's only for entertainment. it's not for entertainment when you come from enslaved people. We all are using these things in different ways for different reasons. And I always like to attribute it to or compare it to something that's made for a specific purpose being used for another reason. If I take a pencil and write with it, I'm using it for its intended purpose. If I take this pencil and poke somebody with it, this pencil was never intended to be used as a weapon, but it's what's done in the hands of the person.
Right. It was
So,
made into one.
right. So I look at genealogy in a similar fashion and DNA. I don't believe that genealogy and DNA oppose one another. They only oppose one another when there is some misinformation in the mix. It could be on the DNA side for lack of samples to actually be able to verify certain groups of people. And it could be lacking on the genealogy side for someone. Maybe they put the wrong, it's the name,
Yeah.
but is this the person?
Right.
So,
It gets tricky like that. And I definitely agree there. Genealogy and ancestry should definitely work together. I definitely because I actually even worked with a professional genealogist.
mhm,
And the information she gave me, it built my tree. But then when I go and try to find DNA matches that have any of this connected to me, I'm not finding it because she just used records. And you can say, oh, this is your person. I found this record and this is your person. Well, you
mhm,
can tell me that about somebody who was born in 1870. How am I supposed to know if they are or aren't? That's what I'm coming to
right,
you for.
right,
The only thing that I have to try to verify if I want to know for sure is the DNA. Is
mhm,
saying, can I find anybody who matches these dates with this record that she's attributing to my ancestor? Can I find anybody with this in their tree? Can I find this name? Even this community? Can I find that? And it kind of helps you because, like you said, you can say anything. Right now, we have Ancestor that I'm tracing. And this is one that I found it did have a ring of truth to it. The DNA matched the story. But
mhm,
I was very apprehensive about it because they're saying that half of it's not true. But they're saying that a a prince of the kingdom of Kong in Africa. He was kidnapped during a war and he was enslaved in Virginia. I traced my ancestry to him using DNA matches and everything else. But then it's like if you look at the trees that also connect him to me, they have all types. They have that he was married to a full blood Cherokee princess who was born in Nigeria. How was a full blood Cherokee princess born in Nigeria? And now y'all making me have to backtrack because I confirmed one ancestor, but y'all telling me his wife is something that I know ain't true.
right,
So I had to go and actually trace the lineage to see. They just added pure blood Cherokee princess in parentheses, but this lady
mhm,
was born in Virginia and she was black. I had to go back and trace because taking the trees have truth, but your have truth gonna make my whole truth seem like a lie.
right.
If I'm just copying, and that's what that I just want because it gets so complicated. But people, please check your trees. Ancestry is notorious for it. You can type whoever you want, and if you push enter, next thing that is going to pop up as a potential ancestor on everybody who ever searches that person.
Exactly.
It's a slippery slope. Double check with that DNA. Look through the matches.
Nah, for real. I think more people gonna need to start showing their grade on their trees. When you have a lot of correct information up there, it's higher. When a lot of that information isn't correct, it's gonna be lower. It's not enough for you to just show the tree anymore. You need to show the grade on your tree.
I agree. 100% agree with that take. I know when mine drops below 8 per 8, I get an 8 point because some stuff I don't double check. I have three lines. Like I said, I trace some of them Europeans. They say it's duplicates and all types of stuff. I'll get to them later. I know why I got that. But
Right,
when it starts getting lower, whatever I just put in gotta go.
right. Gotta double check. Gotta make sure that the information is correct. And that's the thing. It's nothing wrong with you may come across something and you're like, this is it. I got it. But it may be some more information that's needed. And then the more information you gather, you see, like, hold on now, like, this part is incorrect, or someone may be attributed an incorrect relationship. I was working on my tree last night, and where I had duplicates, but one duplicate would say, this is the husband of this person, but the other one would say, this person is the son. So it has the same individual's name with conflicting information. Sometimes we have to go back and clean them up, do some pruning, get some of the extra stuff out of there. If it doesn't go, take it off. Or even if it's just that's why a lot of times I might say I come across some information and the name matches, maybe the year of birth matches, but I don't really know if anything else matches. I just put it in the maybe pile.
Right.
And,
And come back to it. It
mm-hmm.
takes more than just finding it. You always want to confirm. You always want to cross-reference because it's so easy. Like you say, with these names, sometimes they're misspelled, sometimes they is doubled. It find these common names that you didn't think was so common. Mary, Tom, Jeff, Jack. It's a you flip a coin, you're gonna find one in the same town, born the same year. So always double check. Even going down generations, sometimes I'll trace their kids to see if any of those names line or places line up to where I've gotten to in my ancestry. If I know for a fact that my mom was born in Alabama, then I need to trace this person who I'm looking at. I need to trace all their children to see exactly where their descendants ended up. Did they end up in Alabama? Did all their descendants move away before this time where this is supposed to be the ancestor that actually connects us? That's my anchor ancestor that I know for a fact existed, placed this time, this date, in this name. So it takes a lot of confirmation even after you find these things. And it's your tree, your not the code, the rating of your tree, your score is something that has to be looked at. Make sure your score is up there.
Most definitely.
I think we got a couple more questions. I said I wasn't gonna keep you all day. So when you started off, I know you mentioned earlier that you had an ancestor who, or not an ancestor, but a family member who is a genealogist. Did you have that help before you started, or did you know of those record keepers in your family, or did when you started by yourself and then you wrote them in as you went along?